Good morning, my old friends. Today, Bigfoot has some good news, so get ready for a little surprise. I'll walk from here all the way to that peak. Time to train these legs a bit. The older I get, the stiffer they feel.
Young friends, don't be afraid of hardship. Don't be afraid of failure. Only through failure can you reach success. Keep trying, keep pushing forward.
Wow, this stream is like a dream for anyone who longs for peace and quiet. This forest really is the perfect place for you.
Those people who claim they've met me say I stink and smell awful, but what they don't know is I bathe twice as often as they do.
That's life. Let people say whatever they want. Live as joyfully as you can. A year passes so quickly, Hiss. No time to waste arguing with anyone.
All right, let's keep going. There's still quite a long way ahead.
It's been such a long time since I last explored this forest. I wonder who else might be living here now.
Oh, someone said Bigfoot's been gaining weight lately, huh? Well, maybe just a little. Only 5 pounds. Ha ha! When you're tired, don't give up. Keep pushing. That's the only way to grow stronger.
Hey friends, look what I just found, Day. Dwarfs! Wow, unbelievable.
Where do you come from, and why are you here? This is my territory, and entering without permission does not make me happy.
I was only teasing you. Stay as long as you like. It will be good to have more friends to talk with.
They're taking me inside. I wonder, do they have something tasty waiting in there?
You're so kind, my friends, but this little sip of wine isn't nearly enough for Bigfoot to drink.
Already drunk so quickly, but this wine's so good it makes the heart drift away.
All right, then. Let's go hunting and cook up a real feast, my little friends.
Because your short legs can't chase down prey, our only option is to build traps. You just want to set this up right so everything is nice and snug in there. All right, the traps are all set. Now let's go try our luck down by the stream, and we can wait while we're at it.
All right then, let's go, brothers.
This water is perfect for fishing, my friends. Everyone, get your gear ready.
My friends, why do you still live apart and not among humans?
Our people are too small in stature. We could never truly blend in or be accepted.
Oh, a fish is biting the hook!
Yes. Good job.
All right.
With a fish this big, we can cook up so many dishes, my friends, dang. But I'll warn you, it's gonna take a lot of beer to go with it.
Look here, our trap worked. 2 chickens caught already.
These fish pieces smell delicious, and now it's time to add some sour tamarind for flavor.
This is the best fish stew.
I agree.
Can I have some more, please?
Now, let me tell you the story humans tell about me, Stay. Ha ha, it's really funny.
Listen, I've been a cop for 11 years, and in that time I've seen plenty of weird stuff. Domestic calls where people were so high they swore their furniture was talking to them. Bar fights spilling out into the streets with grown men acting like wild animals. Hell, I once had to chase down a guy who honestly believed he was a vampire and tried to bite 3 different people at a gas station. But nothing, and I mean nothing, ever prepared me for what went down one October night 13 years ago. To this day, I'll still bolt awake, drenched in sweat, with the memory of those eyes staring back at me in the beam of my flashlight. The way it looked at me like it was deciding whether I deserved to die. Maybe I should start from the beginning. It was a Thursday night around 11:30. I was working the night shift in my county, a mix of farmland and heavy woods. Most of the calls we got out there were routine, deweys, family disputes, the occasional theft. The kind of stuff you expect in a place where people live miles apart and sometimes have way too much time to drink and stew over their problems. That night, my partner called out sick with stomach trouble, so I was running solo. Normally, that wouldn't bother me. After more than a decade on the job, I was used to handling things alone. Besides, our county was pretty quiet most nights. The worst thing I usually had to deal with was a farmer's cow wandering onto the highway. I was parked at a late-night diner, knocking out paperwork and downing my fourth cup of coffee when the call came over the radio. The dispatcher's voice had that tone, the kind you instantly recognize when something's off, even though they're trying to sound calm and professional. She said there'd been a domestic disturbance out on a farm about 15 miles down County Road 47. The address she gave me made me pause. That part of the county was way out there. Houses were so spread apart, your nearest neighbor might be 2 miles away. When something went wrong out there, it could get bad fast, no one around to call for help. But what really grabbed my attention was what she said next. The woman who called 911 had been screaming about something huge outside her house. Not someone, something. The line kept breaking up, but the dispatcher swore she heard glass shattering in the background before the call dropped completely. And when you hear something like that, your mind races to the worst-case scenarios. Maybe an armed intruder, maybe someone having a psychotic break, maybe just some tweaker spun out after 3 days awake and hallucinating monsters. I'd seen that more times than I could count. I radioed back that I was en route and started driving. County Road 47 is one of those old back roads that snakes through some of the thickest forest in the area. By day, it's picturesque. At night, especially on a moonless night like that one, the trees crowd in on both sides like you're driving through a tunnel. The further I went, the fewer houses I passed. First, it was a handful of newer homes where city folks had moved out for more space. Then it gave way to old farmhouses, some standing for 60, 70 years, tucked deep on big wooded lots. The place I was headed turned out to be at the very end of a long dirt drive branching off the main road. My headlights cut through the darkness as I bounced along the rutted track. Tree branches scraped against the sides of my cruiser. It felt like I was driving forever before I finally caught sight of a light in the distance. About halfway down that drive, though, something made me slow the car. My headlights picked up something white dangling from a branch about 20 feet up. At first, it looked like a rag fluttering in the breeze. As I got closer, I realized it was a torn white t-shirt, hanging about 8 feet off the ground like it had been ripped clean through and snagged there. And it was fresh, no dirt, no weathering, no sign it had been out there long. The branch was way too high for anyone to just jump and catch. That stuck with me. I made a mental note to ask the homeowners about it later. Not long after, my lights swept across a line of trees, and that's when I noticed something that stopped me cold. Long, deep gouges raked down the trunks, claw marks bigger than anything I'd ever seen. Some of them were nearly 10 feet up. I've seen what bear claws can do to wood, and this wasn't the same. These cuts were too deep, too wide, too high. Finally, the farmhouse came into view, a 2-story place from the 52nds, maybe, white siding, wraparound porch, sitting in a small clearing surrounded by forest on 3 sides. Lights were on in a few windows, which for a second almost felt reassuring. Usually, when there's real trouble, the place is dark. But something about that house, glowing in the middle of all that black woods, didn't feel safe at all. But as I pulled closer, something made me hit the brakes and really take stock of the scene. The front door wasn't just unlocked, it was wide open, the screen door hanging off its hinges like something had ripped it apart. I parked the cruiser on the gravel drive and sat there for a moment, watching. The house was dead silent. No yelling, no music, no TV, nothing. Just silence, and sometimes that's worse than noise. When someone calls 911 inches a panic and you show up to a house swallowed in silence, it usually means one of 2 things. Either the problem fixed itself, or it got a whole lot worse. As I sat there, another detail caught my eye. The window facing the drive had dark smears across the glass. At first, I thought it was mud. But when I stepped out with my flashlight and looked closer, I realized those weren't random smudges. They were handprints only bigger than any human hand I'd ever seen. Some of them were so high up the window that whoever made them would have had to stand at least 8 feet tall. I swept the beam around, feeling the kind of quiet that presses down on you. Not just no sound quiet, I mean total silence. No wind in the trees, no insects, no owls, no nothing. The whole forest felt like it was holding its breath. Even the crunch of gravel under my boots sounded too loud. I called out, identified myself as law enforcement, asked if anyone was home. My voice just got swallowed by the stillness, no answer. But I swear I heard movement out in the trees behind the house, just a faint rustle, like something big shifting its weight from one foot to the other. Training tells you in moments like this to move carefully, make contact with whoever lives there if you can. You never know what you're walking into, especially with signs of a break-in or a struggle. I kept my hand close to my sidearm as I climbed the porch steps. That's when the smell hit me. I'd never smelled anything like it before. Musky, heavy, almost like wet dog mixed with something wilder, something I couldn't place. It was animal, but thicker, more overpowering than anything natural I'd ever encountered. The stench almost made me gag, and it seemed to be rolling right out from inside the house. I shined my flashlight through the open doorway into the living room, and for a second my brain just froze. The place was wrecked. An old leather recliner flipped over, a coffee table smashed to pieces, a shattered lamp scattered across the hardwood floor. But it wasn't just trashed, it looked torn apart in pure rage. Deep claw marks raked the wooden walls, cushions ripped open, stuffing thrown everywhere. And on the floor, clear as day, were muddy footprints leading from the front door toward the back of the house. At first glance, they almost looked human, but when I crouched down with the light, I saw they were way too big. We're talking prints 15, maybe 16 inches long, at least. And they weren't just wide, they were sunk deep, like whatever made them weighed a ton. What got me was this. There were only the big prints. No smaller human tracks. No signs anyone had tried to run. No scuffle marks, nothing. Just those massive footprints heading deeper into the house. I called out again, louder this time, asking if anyone needed help. That's when I heard a faint moan drifting from upstairs. It sounded like someone crying, maybe praying under their breath. And under that, almost too soft to catch, came the hushed voices of 2 people whispering frantically to each other. I drew my weapon, heart pounding, and started clearing the rooms one by one. The kitchen was a wreck, chairs overturned, cabinet doors hanging open, muddy handprints smeared across the walls. The whole place felt like it had been dragged through hell, and I had the sinking feeling I hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. But again, these weren't ordinary handprints. They were huge fingers twice as long as mine, and some of them were pressed up nearly 8 feet high on the walls. What really made my stomach drop, though, was what I found on the kitchen counter. There were pieces of raw meat like steaks or a roast pulled out of the fridge and just left there. They looked handled, like someone had picked them up and squeezed them. Big, clear depressions marked the meat where those massive fingers had pressed in, like whatever touched them had lifted the cuts up to inspect them and then lost interest. The moaning got louder as I climbed the stairs. The noise came from what looked like the master bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was closed, so I announced myself and eased it open. The room looked like people had barricaded themselves inside. A wardrobe had been shoved against the closet door, and when I moved it aside, I found an elderly couple huddled in the closet. They were both well into their 70s and utterly terrified. The woman was shaking so hard she could barely form words. The man stared at the window like he expected it to explode inward at any second. I holstered my gun and tried to calm them down, but they were in shock. The woman kept repeating the same line over and over. "It's looking in our window. It's looking straight at us." She pointed at the bedroom window and buried her face in her husband's shoulder. The man was a bit more coherent. He told me they'd been downstairs watching TV when they heard something moving outside. At first they thought it might be a bear. Getting into the trash, we get bears in drought years when food is scarce, but then whatever it was started pounding on the siding. Not the soft scrape of claws, actual blows, like a fist hitting wood. He said he went to the front window and saw it then. According to him, the thing was massive, upright, like a man but standing at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur or hair. The face, he said, was almost human but not a prehistoric sort of look, with bright, animal-like eyes that reflected the light. The woman dialed 911 while he watched it move. While she was still on the call, the creature walked around to the back of the house and pressed its face to their bedroom window. She said it put its mouth against the glass and she could see its breath fog the pane. That's when they grabbed a few things and crawled into the closet. I helped them to their feet and told them I'd clear the rest of the house to make sure it was safe. The man grabbed my arm before I left and said whatever it was still out there. He'd heard it moving around while they hid. I left them in the bedroom and went back downstairs. The back door was still locked, but when I checked the frame with my flashlight, I found deep dents all around it, like enormous claws had tried to pry it open. The scratches were so deep I could press my finger into some of them. What really bothered me, though, was the back porch chair. It had been absolutely destroyed, not just broken, but ripped apart like someone gripped it and tore it to pieces by hand. Shards of wood were scattered across the yard, and some larger pieces had been hurled into the house, leaving dents in the exterior siding. That's when I decided to step outside. I walked into the small yard and immediately saw what the couple had been talking about. There were giant handprints on several of the windows, some of them 2.5 meters up. Whatever left them had to be tall to reach that high. But the prints weren't random. They were placed deliberately, like something was moving from window to window, peering inside. I could follow the trail of hand marks all the way around the house. Whatever it was had circled the place multiple times, checking every window and door. While I was inspecting one of those prints, I heard heavy footsteps in the brush behind the house. Not the light padding of a deer, not the lumber of a bear, steady, deliberate, the sound of a large biped putting weight down on 2 feet. The noise came closer. I could hear branches snap as it pushed through the undergrowth. I swung my flashlight in that direction, and for a split second I caught something black moving between the trees. Just a second, but it was unmistakable tall, upright. When the beam hit it, it paused, and I swear I saw 2 eyes flash back at me. Then it melted deeper into the woods, staying just far enough to be out of my light. That's when a cold realization crawled up my spine. There were giant footprints all around the property, but they weren't uniform. Some were noticeably larger than others, which meant one thing I didn't want to admit to myself. There was more than one of these things out here. The prints formed a rough circle around the house, like multiple creatures had been moving in formation, surrounding it. My first thought was simple: call for backup. Whatever was happening out there was way beyond normal, and I wasn't equipped to handle it alone, especially not if there were multiple creatures. I went back inside and tried raising dispatch on the radio, but all I got was static. The radio had worked fine on the drive in, but now it was useless. I tried my cell phone, no signal. Not unusual in these hills, but the timing was unnerving. It felt like I'd been cut off from the outside world right when I needed it most. I was standing in the kitchen, cycling through channels and holding my phone up, hoping for even 1 bar, when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. A deep, guttural voice, or maybe a howl rolling in from every direction at once. Not quite animal, not quite human. It was as if several massive things were communicating in the dark. The sound went on, echoing through the forest until it finally stopped, leaving a silence that was even worse. Then crash. Something slammed through the back window. A rock the size of a football tore straight through the glass and landed in the kitchen amid a shower of shards. I flinched back and drew my weapon, but what really froze me was the precision of the throw. That rock didn't just break a pane, it punched clean through the center of the window. That wasn't random, that was deliberate. Upstairs, the elderly couple screamed. They'd clearly heard the shattering glass and thought the thing had gotten inside. At the same time, I heard pounding on the exterior walls. Hard, deliberate blows, like someone swinging a baseball bat against the siding. First the back of the house, then the side, then the front. The hits came from different angles, like coordinated strikes. The house groaned under the pressure, and I found myself wondering if the walls would actually hold. The couple upstairs were shouting nonstop, voices breaking with terror. I knew I had to act before one of them had a heart attack. Waiting for backup wasn't an option, not with no comms, no phone, and no guarantee anyone was coming. There were innocent people upstairs, and whatever was outside was growing bolder by the minute. I checked my sidearm, made sure the magazine was full, took a deep breath, and stepped back outside. The pounding stopped the second I opened the door. Silence again, but not the kind of silence you get in the woods. This was predator silence, the quiet you feel in your bones when something is watching you. I could feel eyes on me from the tree line. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there. Slowly, I worked my way around the house, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other, scanning every shadow. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure anything out there could hear it. I was halfway around when I finally saw it. The creature stood by an old shed, maybe 50 yards out. When my beam hit it, it didn't run, didn't flinch. It just turned and looked right at me. I've seen bears, deer, coyotes, everything that roams these woods. They all react to light the same way. They freeze like a deer in headlights, or they bolt. Not this thing. It stared at me with eyes that felt intelligent, studying me, calculating. It was exactly as the old man described, only worse, up close, towering easily 8 feet tall. Its body was covered in tangled black hair that seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight. The size of it was staggering, shoulders too wide, arms too long, hanging almost to its knees. But it was the face that stopped me cold. It wasn't fully human, but it wasn't fully animal either. The features were too broad, too rough, too alien, and yet, behind those eyes was thought, awareness. It was looking at me the way a man studies another man, not like prey, not like a startled animal. There was calculation in that stare, like it was weighing options, deciding what to do with me, and what made it so terrifying was its stillness. Most animals, even predators, fidget when they encounter humans. Ears twitch, weight shifts, heads turn. This thing didn't move a muscle. It just stood there, completely motionless, except for its eyes, locked on every move I made. I did exactly what training drilled into me. I leveled my weapon, shouted for it to stop, to stay where it was. Yeah, I know how that sounds, barking commands at something that sure as hell wasn't going to understand English, but when your adrenaline spikes, you fall back on muscle memory. That's what keeps you alive. But it didn't run. That's what rattled me most. Any bear, wolf, coyote, hell, any wild animal would have bolted the second I lit it up and started yelling. Not this thing. It just stood there, sizing me up, like it was deciding how much of a threat I really was. Then, it started walking toward me. Not charging, not rushing, just slow, deliberate steps, careful and steady. As it closed the distance, I heard it making sounds deep in its chest. Not a growl, exactly, more complex than that. Almost like it was trying to speak. Whatever it was, the tone was low, guttural, and dripping with menace. I backed toward the house, gun fixed on it, shouting again for it to stop. It ignored me, kept advancing. With every step, I caught more detail in the flashlight beam, and each one made the scene more surreal. The hands were massive, easily twice the size of mine, fingers thick enough to snap bone without effort. The legs were powerful, built for brute force instead of speed. But what truly unsettled me was how human its gait looked. Not lumbering like a bear, not tentative like an animal out of place. It walked with purpose, like a man who knew exactly where he was going. That's when I realized what it was headed for. In the yard sat an old piece of farm equipment, a heavy steel plow that had to weigh a couple 100 pounds. And this thing wasn't just wandering, it was going straight for it. I watched, stunned, as it bent down, gripped the plow, and lifted it clean off the ground like it was cardboard. It raised the whole damn thing over its head without a flicker of effort, holding it like a weapon, like it was preparing to hurl it or swing it. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some curious animal sniffing around. This was a predator about to attack, and it was smart enough to arm itself. I had maybe 2 seconds to decide. It was only 20 feet away, hefting a piece of iron farm gear that could crush me flat. Upstairs, an elderly couple was counting on me to keep them alive. I was the only thing standing between them and whatever this was. Time slowed to a crawl. I saw everything, the flare of its nostrils with each breath, the calculation in its black eyes, the way it shifted the plow in its grip to get better leverage. This wasn't instinct. It was conscious choice. It was showing me it could hurt me, and worse, that it understood exactly how. I squeezed the trigger. 3 rounds, center mass. The gunfire cracked across the clearing like thunder, and for a split second, everything went still. The creature dropped the plow, the metal slamming into the dirt with a crash that seemed to echo forever. It staggered back, glanced down at its chest, and for the first time I saw its expression change. Shock, confusion, almost disbelief. Then it looked back at me. The intelligence was still there, but now it was twisted with something darker: pain, fury, and something that almost felt like betrayal. Like it couldn't believe I'd actually shot it. It lifted a hand to the wound, pressed its palm against the hole in its chest, then stared down at the blood smeared across its fingers. Even in the beam of my flashlight, I could see the dark, viscous liquid on its fingers, blood. I knew I'd hit it, but it was still standing, still locked on me with those terrifyingly human eyes. Then it made a sound I'll never forget, one that still crawls into my nightmares. It wasn't a roar, and it wasn't a scream. It was something older, deeper, pain and fury tangled together. It came from way down in its chest, so loud I felt it in my bones. It was the sound of hurt, but also a promise. This wasn't over. Then it turned and ran into the brush, not like a wounded animal retreating, but with purpose. It crashed through saplings and undergrowth like they weren't even there. I tracked it by the breaking branches until the noise faded deeper into the woods. And that's when I heard them. Other voices. The same strange, unnatural howls, echoing from all directions around the house. It wasn't alone. There were more out there. 4, maybe 5 different calls, overlapping, rising and falling in some crude chorus. They'd heard the gunfire, they'd heard one of their own cry out, and now they were answering. My stomach turned cold. Whatever I'd just wounded had backup, and now they all knew we were here. I ran back inside and tried the radio again. Suddenly, it worked. Crystal clear, like the interference had lifted the second that thing disappeared into the woods. I called for backup and an ambulance, told dispatch I'd fired my weapon in response to a disturbance, and I needed units on scene immediately. Dispatch asked if there were injuries, and for a second I didn't know what to say. I couldn't exactly tell her I'd just shot something that wasn't supposed to exist. I settled on uncertain injuries, possible threats still in the area, and urged them to hurry. While I waited, I checked on the couple upstairs. They were still holed up in the bedroom, more shaken than before. The woman kept asking if I'd killed it. The man wanted to know if it was safe to come out. I told them the truth. I'd shot something that had been threatening us, but I couldn't say for sure if it was dead. I advised them to stay put until backup arrived. The last thing I wanted was for them to come downstairs and walk right into that thing if it decided to return. I went back outside, hugging the walls of the house, and found the blood trail easily. Thick, almost black, sticky under the light. More than I expected. Drops, smears, even a couple large pools where it had stumbled. For the first 150 feet or so, the trail was clear broken branches, trampled brush, heavy blood. But I wasn't about to follow it alone into the tree line. Not with those other voices still echoing in my head. The howls had gone silent again, replaced by the worst kind of quiet, the kind where you know you're being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that multiple pairs of eyes were tracking me from the dark. 20 minutes later, the first unit rolled up, followed by an ambulance and 2 more patrol cars. When the other deputies saw the condition of the house and listened to my account, their smirks died quick. They secured the scene, called in more support, and started documenting everything. One of the first guys on scene spotted the prints in the mud. His whole demeanor changed. He'd been ready to crack a joke about me shooting at shadows, but once he saw those tracks, he shut up. The footprints were massive, unmistakable, and nothing like any known animal. We spent the rest of the night logging everything. The prints circling the property, the giant hand smears on the windows, the busted back window, the shredded porch furniture, the claw marks at the doors. Photos taken, casts poured, measurements logged. The blood was the worst of it. We tracked it 100 yards into the forest before it vanished at a rocky outcrop. There was more than enough to confirm it had been hit, and hit hard. Samples were bagged, tagged, shipped off for testing. I never saw a lab report. What shook us all wasn't just the physical evidence, it was the intent behind it. This hadn't been random animal behavior. The thing had circled the house, checked windows systematically, tested the doors. It had used tools, thrown a rock with accuracy, lifted a plow as a weapon, and it hadn't been alone. They had communicated, coordinated. This was organized, intelligent, deliberate, not an animal, not in the way we understand the word. And that's where the official record gets messy. No one wants to write a report saying a cop shot something that fits the description of a so-called legend. Officially, the incident was logged as an attack by an unidentified animal, and my use of deadly force was ruled a defensive action to protect human life. But among the officers who showed up that night, especially the ones who came later and didn't see the full scope of the evidence, there was plenty of skepticism. A few of them joked that maybe I'd shot a bear standing on its hind legs and let my imagination run wild. But the guys who'd actually seen the tracks, the handprints on the windows, the busted front door, and the blood knew I wasn't making it up. The physical evidence didn't fit any normal explanation. I was pulled off the street and placed on administrative leave while an internal investigation into the shooting ran its course. That's the standard procedure whenever an officer fires his weapon. You meet with internal investigators, undergo psychological screening, and write out a full, detailed statement of everything that happened. The psych evaluations were the worst part. The department psychologist kept asking about stress, fatigue, problems at home, anything that might have affected my judgment. She wanted to know whether I drank, took meds, or was sleeping. I could see the doubt in her eyes, the way she kept circling back to whether I might be cracking under pressure. I'm an 11-year veteran with a clean record. I told her I'd shot a roughly 8-foot creature covered in hair. From her point of view, maybe I sounded unhinged. But I couldn't stop thinking about those eyes, the intelligence I'd seen in them. Most animal attacks are instinct, a bear protecting cubs, a mountain lion defending territory, an abused dog snapping. This wasn't instinct. The thing looked at me like it understood what was happening, like it made a conscious decision to threaten me. That level of cognition in something that shouldn't exist was unnerving in a way I couldn't fully explain. It suggested there were creatures out there that could plan, remember, hold grudges, learn from mistakes, and come back for revenge. After 6 weeks on administrative leave and 3 more psychological evaluations, I was cleared to return to duty. But I didn't go back to patrol. Officially, the explanation was that I needed time to recover from a traumatic use of force incident. Unofficially, no one wanted me answering calls in heavily wooded areas not after what happened. The dynamic at the station shifted. Some officers rallied behind me, especially those who'd seen the scene firsthand. Others treated me like a punchline or a liability. I earned a nickname, the guy who shot Bigfoot. Not exactly a badge of honor. Newer officers would joke about carrying silver bullets on night shifts or ask if they should be watching for werewolves on routine stops. The jokes stung because the problem didn't end that night. The farmhouse. In the months that followed, more reports trickled in from the same general area, many of them never making it into official police reports. Farmers began calling about livestock found dead, not mauled in the way predators usually do, but killed with a precision that suggested the attacker knew what it was doing. Animals weren't eaten or dragged off like normal prey. They were killed and left in place, as if someone or something were sending a message. One farmer found 3 head of cattle in a field, each dead from catastrophic blunt force trauma to the skull. The veterinarian who performed necropsies said the wounds were consistent with being struck by something tremendously powerful, but he couldn't identify any implement or force that matched those injuries. Hikers reported huge prints in the mud along trails through the national forest. The impressions were always on soft ground, easy to spot, and far larger than human footprints. Some measured over 16 inches long, with strides suggesting a height well above the average person. What scared people most were reports of trees broken or bent in ways that made no sense, not from wind or lightning, but twisted and snapped as if gripped by an immense force and bent until they snapped. None of it fit the normal patterns of wildlife behavior. And the more evidence accumulated, tracks, broken trees, the livestock deaths, the harder it became for anyone who'd been there to dismiss what had happened that night as a simple mistake or a bad dream. Some of those trees were trunked at 20 to 25 centimeters, too big for a person to just snap, and they'd been broken deliberately, not tossed over by wind or storm. The pattern was weird. Most of the incidents clustered inside roughly a 10-mile radius from where I had my encounter, like some territory had been marked off and guarded against human intrusion. The closer you get to certain pockets in those woods, the higher the chance of running into something unusual. What chilled me more than anything was how it escalated. Early reports had been mostly sightings or minor property damage. After I opened fire, though, the calls turned violent. Livestock killed, property wrecked, behavior that looked like intimidation tactics meant to drive people away from specific stretches of land. It was almost as if the creature I shot learned from the contact and got more aggressive about defending its space. Or maybe more of them started showing up and decided humans were an unacceptable danger in their domain. What scared me most was what that pattern suggested. Maybe there are small populations of these things living out in remote wilds across the region, maybe even the country. If that's true, then what I ran into wasn't an isolated incident. It was one piece of a much larger pattern of contact between people and something science hasn't acknowledged. Sometimes I replay that night in my head and wonder if I should have handled it differently. Maybe I could have tried to communicate instead of shooting. Maybe if I'd shown it I wasn't a threat, it would have walked off and the old couple wouldn't have been terrified or hurt. Then I remember how it hoisted that piece of farm equipment like it weighed nothing. I remember the intelligence in its eyes and the way it deliberately moved toward me. And I remember there were 2 elderly people upstairs depending on me to keep them safe from something they didn't understand and couldn't fight. I did what I'd been trained to do. I protected them from what I genuinely believed was a lethal threat. Whether that threat was animal, human, or something else entirely, it didn't change the fact that I believed those people were in danger, and I acted accordingly. Would I do the same thing again in that situation? Honestly, I don't know. What I do know is this world contains things we can't fully explain, things that live in the space between what we think we know about nature and what actually island. That's my story. Take it how you want. I protected those people from what I believe to be a real threat. Whether that threat was human, animal, or something in between doesn't change that. Would I do it again? I can't say for sure. That's the end of the video. Thanks for listening.